opening songs are Come Now Is the Time to Worship, which is on page 3176 from the Green Book. Spirit of Gentleness, which is on 2120 from the Faith We Sing. And Wounded World Cries for Healing, 2177, also from the Faith We Sing. And the words will be on the monitors. We invite you to remain seated as we join together.
Songs. I know I did. And I want to welcome you all this morning. My name is Lee Kemp, and I'm the treasurer, and I'm on worship, and I do coffee hours and things like that. So I really enjoy coming to this church, and I hope you enjoy this Sunday morning and will come again. But first I'd like to just go over some things. So I want to say hi to our live streamers who are now watching advertisement free. And also, I want to note that there are fellowship pads on the side of all the aisles, and we'd really like you to fill them out, please, while you have a chance. Also, if anyone hasn't been here for the first time, hasn't been here in a while, we do have welcome packets. They are in the back on our welcome table right there behind the last row in the center. Or you can see our pastor to get a copy. And the other thing that might be a little different for most people if you haven't been here before, our offering plates are right there, and there are two right in the back on either side of the center aisle. And anytime, just please place your offering in those plates. We do not do a formal collection. Our restrooms are right out here through this door, ladies' room and a family room right there. And please, after worship today, please join us for coffee hour so we can all have a chance to talk some more. And now, let's start worship. I have a favorite hymn by Amy Grant, Emmanuel, God with Us. Just one of the many names we give to Jesus. As our call to worship this morning, I offer this quote from the book God and Empire by John Dominic Crossan as one way to think about what it means to resist. Imagine this question. There was a human being in the first century who was called Divine, Son of God, God, and God from God, whose titles were Lord, Redeemer, Liberator, and Savior of the world. Who was that person? Most people who know the Western tradition would probably answer Jesus of Nazareth. And most Christians probably think that those titles were originally created and uniquely applied to Christ. But before Jesus ever existed, all those terms belonged to Caesar Augustus. To proclaim them of Jesus the Christ was thereby to deny them of Caesar the Augustus. Christians were not simply using ordinary titles applied to all sorts of people at that time, or even extraordinary titles applied to special people in the East. They were taking the identity of the Roman emperor and giving it to a Jewish peasant. right from the beginning, we were resisting. So now, I'd like please feel free to stand up and welcome each other and pass the peace. You can walk around, you can stay in your seat if that's comfortable for you, but just another way to say welcome.
folks wind up passing the piece, could we have some people join us up front? It's Stories by the Campfire for our next part of the service.
Our book today is Miriam, Moses' sister, I invite any children to come forward, and I will be reading this book, and any children at home. This would be a good time to sit and watch because I think you'll really enjoy this story, Miriam, Moses' sister. Miriam, Moses' sister, was written by Teresa Morton, and the pictures are by Ron Wheeler. Miriam liked being a big sister. She never felt lonely when she could play with her little brother and help take care of him. One day, her mother and father told Miriam and her brother Aaron some big news. Soon they would have another new baby, brother or sister. How happy Miriam was when her little brother Moses was born. When she tiptoed in to see him, he looked up at her with his round, bright eyes. Miriam thought Moses was so cute, all soft and wiggly. Everyone who came to visit said he was the most beautiful baby ever. But later, Miriam saw her parents whispering, looking very worried. "What's wrong?" Miriam asked as she climbed onto her mama's lap. "The Egyptians are looking for baby Hebrew boys," her father told her. "We are Hebrews. We must find a place to hide Moses." Miriam knew just the place to keep Moses safe. She ran up to her secret playroom and quickly picked up her toys and swept the floor. Then she ran back to Mama and Papa and said, "Please, let's hide him in there." Moses grew happy and strong in his new little room. But soon they had to find another hiding place. Moses was growing too big to stay in the little room, so Mama and Miriam wrapped him in a blanket and walked to the river's edge. They placed him in a basket safe in the bulrushes. Miriam hid under a shady tree to watch over him. Hours went by. Just as she was getting sleepy, Miriam heard singing and laughing. Oh no! The Egyptian princess was coming with her friends to bathe in the river. Miriam put a hand over her mouth and watched with wide eyes as the princess spotted the basket. Then Moses began to cry. Miriam watched from her hiding place. She was happy when the princess's kisses stopped Moses from crying, but she came down to the water's edge when the princess said she was going to take Moses home with her. Miriam had a smart idea. She stepped out where the princess could see her. "Shall I go find a Hebrew woman to take care of the baby for you?" she asked the princess. The princess said yes. Miriam ran home to get her mother. As they hurried back to the river, Miriam told her everything that had happened. The princess, not knowing they were Moses' own mother and sister, let them take little Moses home till he grew older. Miriam was so happy to have baby Moses back home. She helped her mother take care of him every day until he was big and strong. When the day came for Moses to leave them, they were all sad. Moses gave Miriam a big hug. He knew how she had helped him. But as they waved goodbye to Moses, they knew they'd see him again. God had told them he had great plans for Moses. Being reminded of God's promises always made Miriam feel better. She was happy she was able to help Moses. She liked being a big sister. Do we have a prayer? Dear God, we thank you that you send helpers into the world and that you invite us to be helpers when we see problems, when we see injustice, when we see things that are wrong. We thank you that we are never left alone, but that you are always with us, helping, loving, caring. We thank you for the gift of this day. Amen. be in prayer. Oh God, we thank you for joy, for reasons to smile, to laugh. We thank you for green and growing things, for delicious food, helpful people. We thank you for encouraging news, for expressions of affection, for reasons for hope. We ask your help that we might have courage for scary things, comfort in pain, patience with the helpless, and impatience with injustice. Help us to understand the complicated and to hear your voice, to follow your leading, to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. You know, oh God, that to be alive can be glorious or scary or humdrum. Maybe we're doing well, or maybe we're just hanging on. Help us look beyond ourselves to see how we might care for others, for your children right next door or across the street or around the world. Expand our horizons so that we hear and see, so that we notice, so that our hearts go out, so that we may work with you. Fill our emptiness with your presence. Fill our wondering with your assurance. Fill our wandering with your direction. Remind us that once we were no people, but now we are your people. We thank you for the gift of this day. For your direction and your love. We thank you that you give us the power of discernment, that not everything has been figured out ahead of time, but that you ask for our participation, our help, our involvement, our investment in who you are, so that we might discover whose we are. Bless each one here with a sense of your presence, with a sense of your strength, and with a sense of your direction. Bless those watching at home, that they may feel you there with them. All this we ask in the Spirit of Jesus, who taught his disciples to pray in a language unfamiliar to us. And so we join in this translation. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Today's scripture comes from Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 through chapter 2, verse 10. Now a new king came to power in Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "The Israelite people are now larger in number and stronger than we are. Come on, let's be smart and deal with them. Otherwise they will only grow in number. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land." As a result, the Egyptians put foremen of forced work gangs over the Israelites to harass them with hard work. They had to build storage cities named Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they grew and spread, so much so that the Egyptians started to look at the Israelites with disgust and dread. So the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites. They made their lives miserable with hard labor, making mortar and bricks, doing field work, and by forcing them to do all kinds of other cruel work.
The king of Egypt spoke to 2 Hebrew midwives named Shiphrah and Puah. When you are helping the Hebrew women give birth and you see the baby being born, if it's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, you can let her live. Now the 2 midwives respected God, so they didn't obey the Egyptian king's order. Instead, they let the baby boys live.
So the king of Egypt called the 2 midwives and said to them, "Why are you doing this? Why are you letting the baby boys live?"
The 2 midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. They're much stronger and give birth before any midwives can get to them." So God treated the midwives well, and the people kept on multiplying and became very strong. And because the midwives respected God, God gave them households of their own.
Then Pharaoh gave an order to all his people, "Throw every baby boy born to the Hebrews into the Nile River, but you can let all the girls live." Now a man from Levi's household married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that the baby was healthy and beautiful, so she hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him any longer, she took a reed basket and sealed it up with black tar. She put the child in the basket and set the basket among the reeds at the riverbank. The baby's older sister stood watch nearby to see what would happen to him.
Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river. While her women servants walked along beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent one of her servants to bring it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. The boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." Then the baby's sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Would you like me to go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed. "Yes, do that." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll pay you for your work." So the woman took the child and nursed it. After the child had grown up, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son. She named him Moses because, she said, "I pulled him out of the water."
There arose a king who did not know Joseph. Such mundane, even possibly boring sounding words. And yet if this were a movie, Ominous music would begin at this point, maybe something from Jaws, just so we would know that these 9 words are anything but mundane. For you see, everything had been fine for the Hebrew people living in Egypt when the king did know Joseph. You remember Joseph of the coat of many colors fame, son of Jacob and Rachel, grandson of Isaac and Rebekah, great-grandson of Abraham and Sarah, with whom God had made a covenant to be their God and to increase them into a great nation. But Joseph was the favored child, and again, when we hear that, he was the favored child. If this were a movie, there would again be ominous music because nobody likes a favored child. And to show him how much they loved him, they gave him a special coat, which he kind of flaunted in front of his brothers. He may have been favored, but he wasn't the most tactful. And as a result of being favored, and as a result of kind of bragging from time to time, you can read the whole story in the Bible, they threw him in a pit. And then they pulled him out and sold him into slavery, and eventually he ended up in an Egyptian prison where he came to the attention of a servant of the king of Egypt for his ability to interpret dreams. To make a long story short, he ended up in the king's court interpreting the king's dreams with such accuracy that he was able to save the Egyptians and the Hebrew people from starvation by anticipating the drought that was to come and storing much grain for the lean years. So the Hebrews were in a good position, living peacefully among the Egyptians as resident aliens with hardly a ripple. But as I said, scary music. There arose a king who did not know Joseph. We all know what that's like. There arose a new teacher who didn't know our family. There arose a bishop who didn't know our church's reputation. There arose a pastor who didn't know our ways. There arose a politician who didn't know our values. We rightfully fear the future when we hear those words, for it easily portends change from which we will not necessarily benefit. That was the case with the Hebrew people. The new king, like all despots, was insecure. You know, heavy lies the head that wears the crown, because you have to keep track and make sure you're still on top. Make sure nobody has snuck up and gotten a higher position than you. And he was worried about the Hebrews because there were so many of them that if they kept multiplying like they were, there would be more of them than there would be Egyptians, and that would lead to a Hebrew uprising. And he spun this whole fantasy, this whole horrible fantasy of how bad things would be if the Hebrews kept multiplying, and so he enslaved them. He thought, that'll take care of it. They'll be so exhausted they won't reproduce. It didn't work. So he brutally increased their workload, and still they reproduced. So finally, he did the unthinkable. He issued an order that every single male baby boy was to be thrown into the river and killed. Fortunately, this is where resistance comes in, because as the story is told, there were 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who revered God more than the king, and so they staged a work slowdown. When the king heard that the midwives were disobeying his order to drown the newborn Hebrew baby males, he angrily ordered the midwives to appear before him, and their defense was, "It's not our fault. The Hebrew women give birth so quickly that by the time we get there, the baby's been born and is gone." So the midwives didn't disobey the king's order, they simply responded to it in their own sweet time. But the midwives were not the only people to resist. As we turn to the mother of one particular baby, we find that she and her daughter tried to keep the baby hidden, but as we all know, babies grow, and after 3 months it was no longer possible to hide him. And so they created a boat. The word in the Hebrew is actually ark. The same thing, the same word as for Noah's ark. They created a little ark out of a basket, and they put pitch all over it so it would be waterproof. And they hid him in the shallow part of the river where all those bulrushes were. So his mother did obey the king. She did put her baby in the river. She just did it in a slightly different way, a more gentle way that wouldn't lead to the baby's death. But even as we have noticed the resistance of the midwives and that of the baby's mother and sister, we're still not finished with the resistance story, for there are yet more characters, and they are the king's own daughter and her servants. The king's daughter went down to the river to bathe, which I assume she did on a regular basis, I would hope so, and she brought her servants with her. That put her in the position to see the basket. So she had her servants bring it to her, and when she opened it, she saw the baby, and he cried, and her heart went out to him, and she said, "This must be one of the Hebrew babies." Upon seeing that this woman was interested in the baby's sister, hiding among the reeds, stepped forward and said, "Shall I bring a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you?" The princess thought this was a great idea, with the result that the baby's own mother ended up, as I read the scripture, getting paid to bring him home and raise him until he was old enough to return to the palace, where the princess brought him up as her own son and named him Moses, for as she said, "I drew him out of the water." So the princess didn't obey the king either. The king, her father, she did just the opposite of what he wanted, bringing life instead of death to one of the Hebrew baby boys. Her act of resistance was not to stage a work slowdown like the midwives, nor to reframe the king's order like the baby's mother and sister. Rather, being in a unique position of power as the daughter of the king, she felt confident either that she could get away with this, either because the king would be very, very busy doing king things and probably lived in another part of the palace and would never have even noticed, or because she could depend upon his loving indulgence as her father. Either way, she used what power she had. Each of these women used the power and the strategic thinking and the abilities they had to resist the injustice they saw in their lives. As we fast forward to our own time, we can use their example to ask what power, what strategic thinking, what abilities does each of us have with which we can resist injustice in our own time. And this is not a political question, because our baptismal vows as Christians include the vow to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. So it's not a political question, but a Christian question, when each of us asks ourselves, what power, what strategic thinking, what abilities do I have with which I can resist injustice in my own time? I think to answer that question, it's helpful to ask a first question, and that is, what injustices really get to me? What evils make me wish I could do something? Where does my passion lie? Some of us want to fix things for people of low socioeconomic status, and some of us really want to make things better for the differently abled, and some of us find that our hearts go out to people affected by racism, and some of us discover that we can really relate to people affected by sexism, and some of us want to make things better for people affected by xenophobia, and some people want to improve conditions for people affected by homophobia, and some people really deeply care about people affected by ageism, and some of us just want to fix it all. There is no shortage of evils to care about. So we resist by noticing where our passions lie, and then following the examples of Shiphrah and Puah, or the mother and her daughter, or the princess and her servants. We resist by using the skills we already have and skewing them just a little so that we still obey the letter of the law, but create a life-giving outcome, as did Shiphrah and Puah. We resist by refashioning an ordinary vehicle so that it becomes a vessel of life, again obeying the letter of the law, but thinking in a different way, as did the mother and sister of the infant. We resist by noticing something that has changed, maybe something that doesn't seem right, and looking more closely at it, as did the princess and her servants. And what a difference one little act of resistance can make. When Shiphrah and Puah resisted the king, they had no idea that they were saving one who would one day save the Hebrew people from slavery. When a baby's mother and sister hit a 3-month-old, they had no idea they were protecting someone who would one day lead the Hebrew people to freedom. When a privileged princess and her servants drew a Hebrew baby out of the water, no idea they were welcoming someone who would one day receive the 10 Commandments from God. When we resist in little ways that seem so futile, we have no way of knowing how far-reaching the results will be, like dropping a stone into a lake and watching the ripples. Perhaps our resistance will be like Shiphrah's and Puah's, obeying orders, but in a way that slows down the injustice. I'm thinking of the myriad forms many of us are required to fill out, and choosing not to respond to the question of what race we are, because we believe that race is a social construct and not a real thing. Or perhaps our resistance will be like that of the baby's mother and sister, obeying orders, but in a way that doesn't feed into death machines. And I'm thinking of people who choose to volunteer for their country, not learning skills to kill, but learning skills to save lives. Perhaps our resistance will be like that of the princess and her servants, realizing the power we have to change the lives of others. I'm thinking now of an older clergyman who was being enthusiastically nominated to represent the conference at General Conference, and realizing his male privilege and wanting to open doors for young clergy women, declined the nomination so that a young clergy woman could go in his place. And I'm thinking of the voting power each of us has in a democracy, and I'm thinking of the power, the right to assemble and march and protest peacefully, and to write and to phone and to visit our elected representatives. Several years ago, out of the blue, I got an email from a young African clergywoman. And she poured out her heart to me. I don't know why. I don't know how she got my email. But she told me how horrible things were for her there. She told me all the injustices she was suffering. She told me of the way she was being treated by her husband's family. I didn't know enough to even worry about what I would be doing wrong. I simply invited her to come and live with us. I raised the money for her ticket, by walking the 10 miles from my home to that church and asking everybody to pledge and support. And together we did that, and we brought her to my home, and she lived with us for 9 months. And we helped her get into Drew University Theological School, where she received her degree, and she went on to become president of African University. I had no idea when I simply invited her to come live with us what a difference it would make in her life and all the lives she has touched now that she is in a position of power. The stories of Shiphrah and Puah, the mother and her daughter, and the princess and her servants are powerful reminders from God that the smallest act of defiance, the most seemingly insignificant rethinking of assumptions, the most apparently innocuous response to privilege, can have huge implications for God's work of bringing the kingdom of God to earth, even as it is in heaven. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Good morning. Another a big mouth or something suddenly.
There were
slapped my
no
face.
bugs when I was up there.
Must be attracted by the fire we've got going on down here, right? All right. Now that the mouth is away and the distractions are gone, we're going to be doing the presentation of gifts, which again we've already collected, so the ushers are not going to go handing by the trays. If you had a chance to do the little card at the end of the pew, if you haven't yet, don't panic. Go ahead and start filling that in. I'll stall a little bit, and then at the end of the service, again, put them into one of the four or one of the three. There's one up here as you're going out to our welcoming or the post-service snack out there. Again, it's out that way and out to your right. We've got food out there for other allergies or et cetera. And so you can put it in there. Otherwise, the ushers will bring forth today's offering. And this is from a church in Australia. We make our offerings, small and large, with the hope and confidence that all we do, all we offer, all we say, all we think, and all we hope will take root in this world and be the source of new expressions of God's love, God's justice, God's character, of God's mission, and of God's reign. And may God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven, through us, alongside us, despite us, and for us. Amen. Life of the people, we have our On a Journey Together with Christ, questioning, serving, and growing, our tagline there. So if you look in our bulletin today, on Tuesday we've got a busy day going on. There's a community meal here from 4 to 6. Worship planning and the leadership both meet at 7 o'clock. So I think for a few people they'll have to decide which way they're going to go on that one. Also, the church office hours and the other activities that are going on in our church are listed in the bulletin. Churros, there's a detailed schedule there. That continues to be a very important fundraiser. This year's Churros group is doing phenomenal. The counters are having challenges of getting what they're collecting, what the teams are earning to fit into the deposit box. So they're doing an excellent job, and I think they deserve a round of applause for what they've done. There's also a Mission U event. That deadline is coming up August 1st, and there's information at the bottom of that if you want to participate in that. Are there other concerns that I missed today? All right then. Our closing hymn is Sent Out in God's Name. It's from The Faith We Sing, 2184, and it'll also be up on the screens. Thank you.
Now may God, the Creator, Christ, and the Comforter be with you and remain with you always.